Okay,
Interesting.
let's get started. Welcome, everyone. I see you, Gina, Mario, Chris, Stan, Guy, Miguel. Thank you for being here. If you're in a place where you can turn on your webcam, we're quite a small, intimate group here, and it helps a lot as we're speaking to actually see the people that we're speaking to. So go ahead and turn on your webcam if you're able to. This is a short presentation and Q&A call with Brian Tobal, the CEO, co-founder of a company called SchoolHouse that I've invested in, that I'm supporting and partnering with, because there is a revolution in education afoot, as you may have noticed, has huge pitfalls and problems and just deficiencies that need addressed, but at the same time, huge opportunities and future potential. As much as I love online courses and cohort courses for adults, or for teenagers even, young students and kids need something different. They need something more interactive, hands-on, in person. And I really believe that there's a lot of synergy and there's something very complementary between online and offline learning these days. Brian has been in this field for quite some time, super experienced, super knowledgeable, and I just really love the concept of learning pods that SchoolHouse is pioneering. And really, I'm just here to introduce you to Brian, to SchoolHouse, and to this general micro school movement, and see if it's a fit for you. See if you want to jump into it and be a part of it. And if so, Brian is going to have some next steps for you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian for just about 5 to 10 minutes of just a brief introduction to SchoolHouse to kind of answer the most common questions, and then we'll have the majority of the call reserved for questions and answers. And I'd love to hear from you about what your thoughts are on this, whether you like it, you don't, what you would need to see, what needs you have that this might meet. All that kind of stuff is very, not just welcome, but we actually want to hear and need to hear to make the idea better and to make it something that can be deployed widely. So yeah, thank you for being here, Brian. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Togo. And it's great to meet everybody. Thank you for coming. And I'm really excited to actually get to the chat part of this, but I thought what we'd do is I would walk through the basics of sort of the brochure that we can share out afterwards and give high level of every piece of it. A little bit from me, my background is all education and technology. So I've been building educational software and programs and curriculums for 14, 15 years now. So this is what I do, this is what I think about. And the place that SchoolHouse got started from was recognizing how important the teacher was. So my last company, we built a piece of educational software that can make predictions on when you're likely to forget what you've learned. And so when we started deploying that in the field, we noticed that we were seeing the best results congregated around specific teachers. And we sold that company to WeWork, and they deployed it to their teams and their schools that they were running in these boot camps. And we kept seeing the same thing, that certain teachers were outperforming everybody else. And so I became really interested and really obsessed with, how do we bring the teacher forward? How do we make the teacher the centerpiece of the educational experience? Because we could change the curriculum, we could change the setting, we could do all kinds of things, and we still couldn't get some teachers to match others. And so SchoolHouse grew out of that. It grew out of this search for a way of making the teacher the centerpiece of the educational experience. We started by helping them create their own independent micro schools and storefronts and things like that. And then COVID came and people started asking for learning pods, and we realized that we could set them up much faster. And so in about 3 to 4 months, we over 10x the number of schools that we had. So we've got close to 100 micro schools, mostly in the New York tri-state area, but we have pockets everywhere. And the good news is that they're working really well. One of the things that will come up later on is these schools tend to move twice as fast as a normal school. And a lot of that is just because the class size is 6 or 8, and every student is getting a lot of individual teacher attention, which we're seeing is really the key and the core here. So we'll just dive in, but that's sort of how SchoolHouse got started. And it's really this focus on the teacher. Let's see what happens whenever I push this button. Yeah, so this is what the schools might look like. We are essentially, we say bring private school into your home, because we bring those teachers in. but we've also do a lot to set up the space. So one of the first things that will happen is we'll say, can we see your space? Because all of this is in person, right? It's usually young children. We do some pre-K, but it goes up to grade 8. And a lot of this are things that we might send. So we'll send those baskets, and the pictures are from the parents, but there's people that work with the families to make sure that the space is set up to look great and to feel like a school. And it's usually pretty fast. So within like a week, we can usually get a space up and running and ready to go. Oh, that button doesn't do anything. And I think just high level, like, who are we? So we're not just a bunch of like tech entrepreneurs. Everybody on the team has either been a teacher in the past or is a parent. So we like to eat our own dog food. I've been building educational technology for over a decade. Joe was a teacher and then worked in educational, regulatory, and legal. So all of the forms and paperwork and things like that run through us. Jacob has started multiple schools. Laura is a curriculum math specialist. So her job was actually to go into schools and to make them better. So they would hire her for that. We hired her to start them off great from the start. And Lindsay and Abby are in that same vein. Abby ran Avenue School in New York City. Lindsay worked at Coney Island Prep as head of academics there. So we brought in people from the normal schools, and we basically had this process of saying, what can we remove? What can we get out of the way so that we can actually focus on the things that produce real results for the students? Our whole focus is on the learning outcomes, right? So if it's not improving the way people are learning, we take it out. And so we've removed all the administrative overhead, right? That is now SchoolHouse. There is no administrators, there are no principals. It's the teacher and the students and us. There's no school buildings, as you've seen. It's in people's homes. We have some that are in a bar, some that are in other like storefronts and spaces. Some are in apartments that have been rented out. You can set up a school anywhere. We also don't mandate a schedule or a curriculum. So some of the schools are Montessori, some of them are Reggio for some of the earlier grades. Some are really STEM focused. We have one that's half day Spanish. So we're not stepping in and saying, we think you should run this schedule, we think you should run this curriculum. We're saying, look at the students in front of you and present them the curriculum that you think they need. Now we do look over things, right? We have weekly check-ins with the teachers. We check in with the parents, I think every 2 weeks. We review unit plans, which are sort of like, what is the overall scope that you're trying to take these students on? But we're not mandating what should happen when. And I think that's actually part of the power here. And the main thing is we reduce the class size to 6 to 8 students. So what that essentially is each student is getting about an hour and a half of individualized attention a day versus like 10 to 20 minutes in a 30-person classroom. So the teacher, and this is one of the things that all the SchoolHouse parents come back and say, the teacher really knows their students, right? They're adjusting what happens based on each of the students in front of them. And one of the things that we're noticing is that causes these schools to move about twice the pace of a normal classroom, right? So most of our pods are finished with their curriculums for the year. So like there's one kindergarten pod that's in first grade. There are multiple first grade pods that have moved on in the second grade curriculum. And there's a bunch of actually like really interesting things that are happening because of that, because we've opened up actually a lot of time, because there's no longer, filling it with all these extra things that the students need to do. So focus on the fundamentals, and now they can alter and shift their pod based on what the students need. The other piece of this is, looks like I lost a piece up here, the teacher. So I started off by saying the teacher is the focus. The teacher is everything in our mind. I often say this line right here, like, think back to the best educational experiences you've had. Chances are you're thinking of a teacher. You're not thinking of the curriculum or some advanced technology. It's the teacher themselves. And so we have like a pretty strict vetting process. We look for people that have been teaching for at least 5 years, usually have an advanced degree, some sort of like elite school, if possible. And the one thing that we really look for is a focus on the teacher-student relationship. So one of the questions that we'll always ask is, why did you become a teacher? Or why do you like teaching? And we look for people that talk about that relationship, because we think that's the key. But everybody screened really thoroughly. And so every teacher that comes across is just the best teacher you're going to be able to find. And if it doesn't work, we can switch, right? Like, you actually can choose your teacher now, right? You're not just buying into a school and hoping for the best. You actually get to know the person. You get to see how they work with your kids. You get to see the growth in your children. And if it's not working, okay, well, let's work and find a teacher that will help you. Um, and then the other piece is we really focus in on, we want that relationship, right? So we have an app that basically allows the teacher to share observations. So we kind of stole this from Reggio Emilio approach, but what we found is that the observations that the teacher makes essentially act as a contract with the parent, right? If the teacher says, I've noticed this about your child, or I've noticed that this is something that tends to happen, or I noticed they do this well or this poorly, and you agree, you can then discuss the approach to take, right? And so that's how the teacher is personalizing. So everything that's happening in the classroom, you get a view of. And also if you have questions, this is, one of my favorites, because I thought it was fascinating. I didn't know that answer. A child, like young children will often write their letters in random places to spell the word. And that's because they're trying to focus on the actual letter. But you get this report weekly at latest, but almost every day it's being updated with observations. And there's a lot of conversations that are happening. And actually, that is, I think, a key of the schoolhouse method is you're seeing what's happening, right? And you can interact with the teacher directly. The other piece is, since we're moving so quickly, what a lot of the pods have decided to do is move to half-day school. So the curriculum is, again, flexible, right? We have people that you can work with. We have instructional designers. But what is tending to happen is that the mornings are being used for core curriculum, reading, writing, mathematics, essentials, other pieces of things. And then we're letting the pods and the students choose how they want to spend the second half of the day. So that is that half-day Spanish that I mentioned. Some of them are doing just 3-hour blocks of science projects and math projects. We think it's half of like, you need to know these pieces, and then we want you to find the thing that excites you, right? Because if you find something that excites you, if you can spark an interest, then you can actually develop a love of learning. And that's part of what we think the magic is here, is if you strip everything away and you keep what's essential, you actually have a whole bunch of time for the kids to find the thing that they enjoy, right? Instead of coming home tired at 3 o'clock. And we're seeing, and this is just a few of them, there are so many of these, but the kids have started their own businesses. So this is like a lemonade powder. We're actually going to launch this for them. So we're setting up the site now. I actually want to see them handle deliveries. I don't want them to just like create this. I'm like, no. You're going to handle shipping. You're going to handle invoicing. I'm excited. I want, this is a 5th grade pod. I really want to see how they handle that. There's a whole thing that a lot of the pods have focused on is social skills. And a lot of it is like managing adult relationships. And so this pod, they had an art gallery, but they also had the kids go around to different local cafes and talk to the people there and say, like, I'd like to host this here, get a contract together. And then this one is, I don't know actually as much about this one as I do the first two, but apparently they did a nonprofit for a local animal shelter where they made what looked to be extremely delicious dog treats. I think that's like a caramel dog treat, which is, something that I would like to have. But this extra time is being used, and it's being used to, some of them are doing projects, some of them are learning languages. It's really about their interest. And then we just have some parent quotes. And I think the reason I picked these two is, one, I think it highlights the value of the pod, or the value of the small group, is that it does create this like mini family. So all the families now are in group chats. They're relying on each other. Hey, my child is here. Can you hold for a little bit? But also the kids are really close. So it's sort of like going to school with all of your best friends. And I think this quote about, when they have that dependable and structure relationship, they have the motivation to learn and participate. And the other piece is that it is really where we're at, is we want to instill a love of learning. It's not just about, filling the children with information. Like there's a portion of that, like school is a job that you have to do. But the other part of it is, if you have an interest, we should be able to ignite that into a passion. And that's what is happening in a lot of these pods in the second half of the day, because they're finishing the curriculum early. So all our parents are really excited. We've had 0 churn. So none of the pods have left us yet. And so if you want to get started, there's a link here, and we'll share this out later, but it's just getschoolhouse.com/schedule. and this will take you to talk to Matthias on my team, who can tell you more about it. But it's a pretty straightforward process, and it's usually pretty quick. So, what kind of teacher do you want? Who's in the group? Deciding the locations. You set up your school online. So you'll put a picture of your space, and then, list it. We'll help you figure out like what tuition should be and things like that. And then we'll start introducing you to teachers. One of them you'll really like. Usually it's one of the first 2 or 3. And now you have you're now part of a team. It's the 2 of you working out like what's the philosophy of the school, how's it going to work, talking to other parents. We'll also introduce you to a ton of parents that are looking to join pods, and you start the school. And we send you supplies. We send we handle all the insurance, all the regulatory, all the insurance for the teachers in terms of their health insurance. So, and some people are actually making money running schools out of their home. So it's pretty cool, actually. And some frequently asked questions. So this will all be a part of the brochure that we send at the end. And my lighting seems to be changing. But yeah, that's the basics of SchoolHouse, right? We are trying to give families and teachers autonomy over how their children are learning and how their students are learning. So we want the parents and the teacher to have more control over what's happening in the classroom, not a mandated schedule. So that's us, and would love to do the Q&A now.
That's amazing, Ryan. I learned a bunch of things there that I didn't even know. I just want to make one comment. I love that this isn't just like, oh, a band-aid temporary measure, like let's just try to get through the next few months, which has been the attitude like for the past year plus. It's like what if we actually reinvented school? Like, yes, for COVID and for what's happening now, but just using that as a starting point for just a reimagining of what school could even be like.
Yeah, we want to create thousands of these micro classrooms that the students can move between. So you can go from first grade to second grade to third grade, stay with the teacher you have, mix a bunch of teachers together that work well for your child, let them work with the teacher that really inspires them for multiple years if that's what you want. We want more flexibility in the system. The students that this works best with are the ones that are sort of mismatched to the system to begin with, right? Like when I talk to the parents, and I left out some of those quotes because just ran out of room. But I talked to one today, and the father said to me, my daughter likes to stand. She doesn't like to sit. She just wants to stand. And everywhere she goes, she stands. She stands at the dinner table. She just likes to be standing up. And the teacher, it was a big problem for her in her kindergarten classrooms. The teacher's like, well, she has to sit down here. We have other students who like have a weak musculature and they get tired during the day and they need breaks. The pod can accommodate that.
Wow.
So it's that accommodation piece that I think is what makes it powerful. That's what we're fighting for.
Yeah, I see that. Okay, we have a small enough group. I think we can unmute and hear from some of you. Let's start with Dan about the art movement extras. If you want to unmute yourself and ask, and then we'll go on to Gina.
Yeah, no, Brian, this is great. This is very exciting to see that it's not just about training for the Industrial Revolution. So I appreciate loads of questions. One quick one was just like, arts movement. To your point, everybody's a different type of learner. The idea of trying to help ensure that a movement, a kinesthetic learner, gets his dose of what he or she needs, and with art and so forth and so forth.
Yeah. So I'm just reading here. I'm seeing your quote. So the idea is that there are some things that are core curriculum and are essential, right? Like and almost everything else is a derivative of that. So reading, writing, mathematics, if you know those things, you can move into chemistry, you can move into law, you can move into all the other areas. And if those areas interest you, we'll add it as a elective, right? So we have like a cooking as chemistry elective, and there's a whole bunch of science-based electives. And on top of that are all the art and dancing and karate ones that you could imagine. So we have some teachers, and this will get better with density, that can either join via a Zoom call, which is slightly harder with some of the younger grades, or can actually show up physically to run like a mini soccer after school or anything like that. So if it's your school is the thing that I would say to think about, right? So if you think something's important, we can work that in. So some of the pods do yoga every day. Some of the pods, the half day Spanish one continuously comes to mind. And a lot of it actually like comes out of the teacher, right? Because if the teacher is excited and passionate about something, they're usually able to hook the kids as well. So it's interesting to see, the pods where you wouldn't have expected STEM to take off for it to be like now these children's passion. But yeah, it's your school. So if you want to mix that in as a part of the core curriculum, that's what we're here for. That's what we do. Oh, shifted. Cute kid too. Is that a future pod student?
Maybe at this rate. I got an 11-year-old. I got two boys who are very like precocious, and one's not a great fit with the standard. So, and she might. This is Hannah Banana. Yeah. By the way, I hope she's a future pod student.
We have a couple pods that are all boys, and they tend to do well with the male teacher, or at least they seem to start to. One of the most interesting ones is a middle school pod that we have. And I talked to the mom 2 weeks ago, and she was telling me a story. She said, before we started doing this, my son's nickname from us was good enough. So all he would ever do was good enough to get by. And he would be like, did you do your extra credit? No, I'm good enough. I got, the main thing done. And so the teacher put together so teacher recognized the motivation gap. And so he put together a game where the students would pick a random job out of a hat. And then he would say, go and buy all the things that you think you would want. And, let's build your future life around this job. And then they picked Teslas and all kinds of different things. And when they did the budget, they all recognized that they were like $40,000 or $50,000 in debt. And so he started to show them like what different jobs make, and they started doing budgets on different jobs. And now the entire pod is like transformed, and the parents are ecstatic because the kids they recognize like why they need to do well, why they need to put in extra effort, because they want these better jobs, because they want to actually like make more money, and they couldn't afford a Tesla as a vet tech. And so like that's the interesting thing about teacher attention, right? That's the interesting thing about the teacher knowing the students is they can recognize what the gap is. They don't have to just follow the schedule. They can say, oh, this is a motivation gap on all of the class. Let's run this exercise to see if it helps. And in this case, it did.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you, Dan. Gina, I'd love to hear from you. Go ahead and unmute yourself if you can.
All pods grade-based.
Yeah, this is great. I guess my question is really more about, we're actually unschoolers right now. I don't know if you guys are pretty familiar.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's great. And I'm actually, I have a 9-year-old and a almost 6-year-old. And we were in the school system. I had been learning about unschooling for years and years and wanted to do it, but really COVID made us pull the trigger. Like we were just finally like done with what was going on. And so we've been doing it this year. And I mean, honestly, socialization is like the big piece. In a non-COVID world, sure, we could find it, but in a COVID world, I feel like this would be a really good solution for us. But I'm curious about alignment with philosophies, and how successful you've been with recruiting parents or families, or are we supposed to recruit? I'm kind of curious how that all works out, so that people can really align on a philosophy. I think that there's a lot of things that are broken in the traditional school system, but like, does everybody think how easy is it to get all parents aligned on the same philosophy so that this can be a really successful endeavor in a small pod?
Yeah. So to answer this, it was either the second or the first question about recruiting. Everybody recruits.
Okay.
So it's the parent, the teacher, it's us. Like we put a pretty big marketing spend behind all the pods. I think you also have our pods grade-based, or do you have mixed age pods? I think that was a question you.
Oh, that was my first question, but then this one was really more
So I'll get into the philosophy then next. Yeah. So we have a lot of mixed grade-based pods. It's pretty easy to differentiate the curriculum and differentiate the instruction with a class this size. We tend to like to keep them within like 2 grade levels. So like a first and a third grader can usually work. A first and a sixth grader tends to be a little bit of a stretch. What usually happens is the older kids end up taking a younger student under their wing. So they'll act as like a part tutor during the process. In terms of like philosophy and alignment, that almost always comes from the teacher, right? What we've seen is that if we let all the parents get together and talk, it's very hard to get alignment. If we let all the parents talk and meet the teacher, they recognize that like, oh, this is an expert that's going to be very good for my child, and they buy into the philosophy of the teacher. So what will happen is the host parent will say, okay, this is going to be the space. They meet the teacher, they generally agree on the philosophy, and then it's the teacher's job to discuss the educational philosophy. And then the parents will buy into that. That's essentially that's the way we think it should work. Where the teacher is an expert in some sort of methodology, or they have their own methodology. They then set the philosophy and everybody agrees to that. So that's usually how those things happen. And on recruitment, it's just everybody, right? It's us, it's you. We have an entire sales and admissions staff. Once we have a pod in a location, we buy tons of ads. We do a bunch of local marketing. We do all kinds of things there. The hard part is usually just getting the first parent set up, and then we fill in from there. I see a monster truck in one of the windows here, Mario. It looks good.
Awesome.
Does that answer the questions?
Yeah, it does. I think that's great. I was actually curious about that because ultimately it really comes down to trying to find other people. And I've kind of looked for this like just loosely to see if we could form a little pod in my community, and it's been a little unsuccessful. So I wasn't sure if like you guys had how your reach was. So that's great.
It helps to have a lot of venture capital dollars and a really great marketing team. So we think of user acquisition or recruiting, as you say, as like the thing that we do and we centralize. So getting the people in and getting the pod started is where we've put a lot of our expertise. Like that's the people that we've hired. So yeah, we're a marketing and recruiting firm almost in a lot of ways, on top of technology and education. The two biggest teams are academics and marketing / recruitment.
Thank you, Gina. I don't see anything else in the chat, unless Dan, you wanted to ask about the adult pods.
I just want to clarify, Brian. At some point, you mentioned the idea is that I live in New York City. The idea is that there's a bunch of different pods all around me. The more pods, the more choices I have, I guess, ideally right fit pods to choose from my kids as they grow in age and grade. Is that right, or did I not hear that correctly?
That's what we're growing into. So right now we've kind of kept a lot of our locations pretty batch because we're trying to get density, right? So that allows you to have a lot of choice. So if you're in the New York tri-state area, it's pretty easy for us now to like find a pod to match you to if you wanted to match. What we're really focusing on right now is new pods, right? So we're looking for hosts. We're looking for people that say like, I have this space in my house, not using it all that often, or I know of a space and I would like to start a school for my children, or just in general. And so that's where we're going now. We're trying to expand our density outside of just the tri-state area. So hence Tiago pinging his group for us, which was very kind of him. So a lot of our focus right now is on new ones and like growing these new ones. So if anybody here is interested, feel free to reach out. I'll actually just put my email in the chat too. But there's also a schedule with the person.
Brian, is it correct to say that the host family or the host parent is sort of like the seed around which everything else grows? Like that's the initial spark?
Yep. Usually like it's a host, and then the host puts up a space, they match with the teacher, and then it's like basically everybody's job is just to get people to meet the teacher. because once people meet the teacher, that's usually when they start to get excited, because they're top educators, right? And you get to choose them, which is I think the big innovation, really, along with this class size.
Yeah, awesome. Carlos, I'm going to ask you to unmute in a sec, but also if anyone else wants to get in the hand raising line, if you click the reactions button in the Zoom toolbar, there's a, you can do any of the emojis really, or no, wait, oh no, raise hand. It says raise hand at the bottom of that window. Then it'll pop up for me and I'll call on you in order. But Carlos, please.
Hello, I'm
Nice
Carlos. I live in Puebla, Mexico, and I've been following you, Tiago, for about 3 months now. And I'm very interested in this school system. Currently here in Mexico, I have a 5-year-old kid. He goes to a German school. And I've been talking with my wife, eventually moving to the beach. And finding a new way of schooling, not attached to a physical school that you have to travel every day. And so this seems to me very disruptive. And I'm just starting to learn about this. I would love if you eventually open outside the US. I would be willing to explore the idea. And I found out also about Galileo, which depends on internet, but it's just 8 years old and older. And my kid is 5 years old. So I'm just interested in when do you plan to open outside the US? I do see a window of opportunity, a very blue ocean for homeschooling with someone that takes the work of giving the legal recognition of the school, regardless of where you are at. I wouldn't mind if my kid has all the recognition in the US despite not living in the US. Because that's the main problem with many countries in Mexico, like changing the mindset of politicians to do all the legal changes. I'm not going to get into that. I just want my kid to learn, and I know he'll eventually learn online or go. I did my undergrad and master's in Boston, so I understand that the world logistics, but I'm just concerned about getting him a good solution, and also
Awesome.
hybrid Spanish-English stuff.
Cool, so, Carlos, thank you. I had that same question because my family's also spread over Latin America. When is this going international, Brian?
The answer that I want to give is the only thing that would stop us is having the teacher. So the only thing that's really blocked the formation of a pod, other than like the family sort of abandoning it, is finding a teacher. So logistically, if there's a teacher in the area that's interested, we could form a pod just about anywhere, which is kind of the beauty of it, right? From a legal and regulatory standpoint, which is not my area of expertise, that is my partner Joe's area, that would be, I think, the only blocker that might stop us forming a pod outside of the US right now. It's just that I don't know what the legal and regulatory environment is in, say, like Canada or Mexico or Latin America. But we would have no trouble getting that teacher set up, unless it was in a different language. That might cause a slight issue. We'd have to maybe find somebody to manage that person. But yeah, if the teacher is available in the area, then we can form it, assuming we are within the legal and regulatory structures that we know how to handle. And we handle all of that. So all of the like homeschooling paperwork or the private schooling paperwork, however you want to structure the school, is all run through us. You just, we give it to you, you sign it. We try to take care of every aspect of setting up the school other than, like cleaning up afterwards. And a lot of the parents use the credit we give them to hire a cleaner.
Awesome, very cool.
Raj, are you also an unschooler?
Yeah. So I'm not a parent, but I'm very interested in unschooling and efficient learning. Um, yeah. So like a thing I've been thinking about a lot is, do you happen to know Pyotr Wozniak by chance?
Yes, yes. My last
Oh.
company we built. Well, I don't know him personally, but I know of him. So
Oh,
my
okay.
last company, we built an entire um, space repetition system built off of his SM2 Well, we
Yeah. Yeah.
used his SM2 algorithm as a benchmark. And so essentially for everybody who else is wondering, so Peter Wozniak founded a company called SuperMemo, and it was an algorithm that would basically give out flashcards to help train you on what you know, to understand what you know. And so it would bring things back at the moment you were likely to forget it. And so we've seen that this has basically been a pretty strong way of keeping people's memory and knowledge, there's somebody coming in, strong over time. And so my last company, that's what we did. So we basically took a lot of his algorithms and we updated them to train people. That was customer service and sales reps. I would love to be able to implement that here again in the pods that we're running, and making sure that like that's one of the ways that we're going to ensure like academic quality over time is probably through some sort of space learning type tool.
I don't see anything else in the chat or in raised hands, but we're really here for you. We have another 15 minutes to answer. I mean, really, it could be a question, could be an observation. I mean, I'm most interested in if any of you are kind of at the threshold. If you're, the target audience and you have a kid that you'd like to put into a pod, is there anything stopping you? Is there any last concern before you jump in with both feet? That would be really valuable for us to know.
What about cost and what is
Yep.
it? What does that look like?
So the costs tend to range based on the geography. You are essentially just splitting the teacher's salary plus like 10% that we take for insurance and all that kind of stuff. So they range from maybe 1,000 a month to 1,800 a month, and that usually goes towards just paying the teacher. And it also depends on like the quality of the teacher, right? So for a teacher that is 3 or 4 years experience in the New York City area, you might spend $1,300-1,400 a month to pay for that teacher. For somebody that has like a PhD and like 15-20 years in school, that can go up to 18 or $2,000. But it's usually within that bandwidth. Like, I think the average is like 1,400-1,500, and it's just depending on the family, depending on the teacher. And obviously, the more people that join the pod, the cheaper it gets. So if you have 8 students, it's a lot cheaper than if you have 4. And that's one of the things that we work to do, is to help fill the pod so that it actually becomes pretty affordable for everybody.
I have a follow-up to that, Brian. Is there a certain term? Like, is it 4-month semesters, or is it really just month by month? Like, what time blocks do you work in?
We usually work in a 4-month semester. And so the parents will, usually most parents sign up for a year, but we work in 4-month semesters. So there's sometimes a renewal point at that 4 months. So you're usually buying 4 months up front. And the pod can take place at any time as well. That's the other thing to think about. So like, it doesn't have to start at 9 a.m. We have some pods that start at 1, which I found fascinating, but it works. So like the flexibility also moves out to the schedule. And so that means that if you want to have like a week off for Thanksgiving, you can take that week off. You just have to work with the teacher and you have to make sure that everybody stays on pace. But it's a 4-month commitment. And Skylar, you just mentioned me. Yes, Mission U, because I was on with Mike from Mission U last night, and that's where it comes from. I was like, I know this person. How do I know this person? It's good to catch up. You're breaking up. Oh, never mind. So yeah, it's a 4-month commitment usually, the like minimum.
Okay, if you wanna get your audio figured out, Skylar, I can have you come up again. I couldn't hear anything you were saying. But in the meantime, let's hear from Charles.
Hey everyone.
Hey.
I was joining this out of curiosity. I work in residential architecture, and in the industry, I really think that co-living spaces is trending, and especially with COVID, it makes me wonder about how we could live COVID-free in like a bubble community. And this pod was like sort of the answer, right? I think my question is like, how that you mentioned that most of the time you try to fit two grade levels together, but like, let's say people down my street, they're, some of them are toddlers and some of them are in high school. Like, how do you handle that?
That's going to be tough. We probably wouldn't do that is the short answer. We try to stay within like 2 grades. So, if you have a first and a third grader, that will work. And some first graders think like third graders, right? Like your grade level being based on your age is something that I think we should actively question. Like, what is a third grader? Where did this concept come from? Why do we have it? Is it because it's actually like indicative of some sort of knowledge level, or is it just because it makes running a, cells and bells school structure easier? I actually don't know, but I would suspect that it's the second. If you had groups like that, I think one would be unlikely that you'd use the same teacher. So you could maybe share the same space, but you might have somebody that teaches the high schoolers, and you might have somebody that teaches the younger kids separately. If they were closer, where let's say it was like, toddlers and 6th graders, it's potentially possible that the same teacher could do that. And we do have an example where a group is splitting the space like that, and there's a TA, and the TA is working with one group while the teacher works with the other, and then they go back and forth. But yeah, I don't think we would take like a 5-year-old and a 15-year-old in terms of groups. That would just be really, we might try it if the parents were really excited about it, just because we would want to know what happens. But I think we would be very reluctant to do that, to be honest. But yeah, if you have some great ideas on how to better utilize space, send those along. I'd love to know.
Well, and how do parents feel, like, how do you help parents feel comfortable about this alternative way of schooling?
Sorry, what was that? It broke up on my side.
I think this is a really great idea, but how do we know that our children will be raised the way that normal children will be raised at normal schools?
I think I would question normal. So from an academic perspective, we run a lot of formative assessments. So nothing real summative, so we don't do like exams, but there is and then I'll answer Gina's question that just came through because that's a good one. We run a lot of formative assessments to make sure that they're on grade level for where they are. So like, if a child's in 2nd grade and they're at a certain point in the year, we'll ensure that they know fractions. We'll ensure that they know, all these other things. In terms of the other acts of normalcy, so one of the things that grew organically out of the pods was this social skills. So almost every single pod has a name, almost every single pod has values, but they almost all have their own unique social skills curriculum that we're now like working to bring together. So because it's outside of a normal school and you don't have the setting imposing rules and structure, the teacher actually takes time to now teach these social skills. And that is extending beyond now to where we're thinking of like, okay, how do we, extend these lessons outside of the school? So like the one pod that I showed you, the parents had them go ask a local coffee shop, can we stage our art gallery here? And so I would actually say it's like above normal, right? Whereas in a school, the social aspects are dictated by the environment and the necessity to just sort of follow the rules. Whereas in a pod, they're dictated on getting along and working with others because you have to. And so like I watched one of the lessons, the teachers will teach the students to say, when you do this action, I feel this way, and I would prefer if you did this. And so they learn how to communicate with each other. And so and in terms of broader socialization, we do a lot of stuff between the pods. So we have pod weeks every so often, in every month or so, where the pods get together. And right now it's based on Zoom, but in the future we'll have them in person more, where they can talk. And then there's always after school stuff that people can join. In terms of Gina, you asked about, are they required to do state testing? Required? No. They can do state testing. I would actually like to see some of them do state testing because I think they blow them out of the water. But I would also probably defer to my partner Joe on that. That is probably state by state. But as far as I know, they're not required to do state testing. For funding to expand pods to new geos demos, you should check out Stand Together. Big fan. Yes, I know this group. Big fan. Is there a minimum number of students needed to make a pod work? Minimum, we like to be around 5. We have some 4. Optimal is probably 6, and high end is definitely 10. And that is mostly a space constraint. I don't know if you've ever had 10 5-year-olds in any space, but that's a special skill set to manage that. And Guy, that's a great question. Yeah. In terms of to take a moment on space, 3 to 4 can work. It's economically typically the thing that blocks that. From an educational perspective, you could do it. 5 is like a magic number where the economics work, the social aspects between the kids start to gel. 6 is also a really good spot. You start to see the strain come in past 8. 8 students will be a lot of people. The teacher can usually know everybody. And then when you start getting into 9 and 10, you almost always have to have like a TA just to help like, because if one student needs to go to the bathroom or something like that, sometimes that's apparent. But yeah, that's a great question. If you can get to 5 or 6, you're in a really happy place. And those tend to be extremely stable pods. So.
Awesome.
Anyway.
Time for 1 or 2 more questions. Now's your chance. Now's your shot. Can either drop it in the chat or raise your hands, or really at this point, just unmute yourself and go for it.
And one thing we'll do is we'll share the brochure after this. So Tiago, I'll send it to you so you can share with everybody. And within there, if you want to talk to somebody on my team, yep, it's in the chat, getschoolhouse.com/schedule. And you'll meet a wonderful man named Matthias who will answer all of your questions. I actually think he might be in here now. I think he jumped in.
Yeah,
so,
encourage.
But I'm cooking dinner.
Yeah,
go to
I dropped.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I dropped the clickable link into the
Actually,
chat.
I actually think you put subscribe instead of schedule, and I actually don't know where subscribe takes you.
No,
yeah,
it's
subscribe
not
takes
real.
you nowhere.
Sorry.
Well,
okay, and it's also HTTPS. Okay, try that one.
There you go.
And I'd really love to see some pods form. I mean, I'd even be curious how I could support. If there's anything that me and my team could do in terms of, I don't know, personal knowledge management, digital taking skills. If there's anything in our curriculum and our content that would be helpful, happy to offer that.
I've actually been thinking about it. So two things that might be fun to do is when you get your little Tiago shelters ready, we can drop those into people's backyards. But actually, one of the things that the parents have become really excited about is a lot of the teachers have started doing note taking as a skill, and I can't remember the one that's popular, the name of it, but they're basically trying to teach the students how to take good notes and how to be good students. So there might actually be a whole cohort for you to help build second brains with. Second brain for 8-year-olds.
Let's do it.
We'll get them all into Evernote.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed is kids totally understand the concept of knowledge and information capture. they're like, oh, obviously I would use my smartphone that is with me all the time to continuously document my experience and then share it through my own lens and my perspective with hundreds or thousands of people. Like, duh.
Right. Okay. Well, it's great to meet everybody, and thanks for coming. If you have any questions, I'm Brian at Get SchoolHouse, and you should also have the link in like 15 different places to schedule a talk with us.
Yeah, and we'll follow up with a lightly edited version of the recording with any links that we shared, with a link to the brochure and a link to schedule a call. Basically, everything you could possibly need to get started with SchoolHouse. And I encourage you to. It's just I wish I had an older kid that I could put into one of these things. My son here is only 3 months old, so a little too young still, but eventually I hope to see him in a pod one day.
It was great to meet everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Tiago, I'll
Really
share
appreciate
this
it.
with you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.